Unless you've been under a rock for the last month and didn't notice the news cameras and the traffic and the looting and maybe even your local supermarket being boarded up, you didn't know about George Floyd or about the situation and the political ramifications of what we're dealing with today. The cover today is 4 of the events that led up to our current position today. What's happening? This is your boy Lascel, the M.B.A, back with you today with a brand new video. For first-time subscribers, I want to welcome you to my channel, and for my returning people, welcome back. What we're going to do today, because there are so many people out there who don't quite understand how it is that we came to this event and why it's become such a global phenomenon and why people are so up in arms. I'm going to cover 4 of the reasons. They're not the only reasons. For people who have been in my community and understand certain things, they understand this is not the only 4 reasons. But for those people that don't quite understand, we're going to cover 4 of the major events that happened that kind of led us to where we are today as a nation. But before we get started, again, I want to ask everyone to like and subscribe to the video, please. If you haven't liked the video before, if you agree with some of the concepts, if you can even understand, what I would want you to do is reach down there, please, and hit that like button so that we can record the fact that you do agree with this. Let your voice be heard. I'd appreciate that. So let's get into it. We're going to cover 4 of the things that led to these events and where we are today. Not led to the actual incident, but what we're going to do is cover 4 of the things that led us to where we are today, and as far as this incident and how this impacting laws and just municipalities on a daily basis. So I'm going to get right to it. Let's start with number 1. Now, I could go back to the election of Donald Trump, but though ever since he came into office in 2017 and he took control, ever since Donald Trump has taken control of office in 2017, he has been an agitator, openly so, for the MAGA constituency, far right-wing people who are of the mindset of empowerment against people of color. Ever since Donald Trump has come into office, he has been kind of a fixture, a figurehead of the elite. When he came into office, he came into the office based on a vote that was sick and tired of the kumbaya, let's get together, let's bring the nation together instead of dividing it, ideology of Barack Obama. And there were certain factions within the country that were kind of fed up with that. Business owners, gun enthusiasts, just a myriad of different factions. If you look at his early rallies where he condoned violence, people being dragged out, people being assaulted, especially people of color who disagreed with it or dissented with the opinions that he had, you understood what was coming had he been elected. Over the course of his few years in office, you can see where he's basically been a right-wing advocate. He's never been an advocate for the little guy. He claims that certain things has to trickle down, but a lot of things that he did was to undo what his biggest legacy was, to undo everything Barack Obama did in his 4 years in office. This may seem like a lot of rambling to some people, but then you can't misunderstand how this president, when these things happened and these occurrences came in, when these occurrences with George Floyd occurred, you can't say that you didn't understand how he would take the stance, not of bringing the nation together and understanding the injustice done, but say that governors were being too weak, issuing sound bites like, if they start looting, we start shooting, and even unleashing the military on peaceful protesters in front of the White House so that he could have a photo op with a Bible. You can't see how this contributed to these things. this didn't just happen. The causality is his ideal approach to the country. It's more about the elite and stepping on the necks of the have-nots, which unfortunately is disproportionately people of color and communities of color. He's about taking money from certain communities and putting it in the pockets of the already affluent. This mindset is something that already annoyed and became an irritant to communities of color. But that was only the first step. Let's go on to number 2. Issue number 1 with the president became a perfect segue into issue number 2. That was the advent of COVID. Now, while I can't blame the president for COVID actually occurring, what I can blame is his handling for COVID. We knew that other nations were locked down and people were dying at a horrific rate. But this man, in his infinite wisdom, we're gonna knock COVID out. We're gonna do what we have to do. We're Americans. And in his infinite stupidity and his infinite hubris, he allowed that thing to propagate in this country for months, which led to the horrific losses that we weren't prepared for. And of course, 42 million and counting unemployed currently. Let's look at that. Now, people may say, well, what could a president do? There was no vaccine, there was no nothing. How many crippling diseases that could have been pandemics happened prior to him? We're talking swine flu, we're talking mad cow disease, Ebola, so many other things that came across American shores, and other presidents understood the threat, and they didn't have a reality TV star mentality, and they took appropriate measures. Because of his late action, COVID caused an already 3-month lockdown, which crippled the economy and the stock market, and has cost millions, tens of millions of Americans their jobs and counting. Currently, while we're about to open back up, people still are feeling anxiety over their jobs. Now, how COVID played into where we are today, when people started losing their jobs and had to stay home, this became an anxiety-ridden society, a society of paranoia. We watched state by state as people were dragged out into trailer trucks to house the dead. We were getting calls about our loved ones. Some of us even suffered from it. And at some point, there's no money coming in for many Americans. There's no relief in sight. You got to handle a fear-ridden household in a bubble. Over the course of 90 days, when the numbers started going down, more so because of the approaches of the states as opposed to the leadership of the presidency, people became very ready to get out of their homes. They suffered from cabin fever. They wanted something to be a distraction. And all these people were held captive at home. Which leads us to the next procession, number 3. Notice the causality, temperament of the president who dictates policy in his nation, COVID, which he completely dropped the ball on, and then we had, during the time of the pandemic, right before the pandemic, in the months that preceded, we had Breonna Taylor, a black woman who was unarmed and was at the wrong address, her home, in her bed, shot dead by officers who executed an illegal search warrant to the wrong address. And instead of saying we did something wrong, her boyfriend, who is legally licensed to carry, fired back at these people who kicked in their doors and just started shooting, and was arrested for shooting the people who killed his girlfriend in her bed as she slept and tried to kill him. Then we had Atiana, which was a young lady, I believe it was Oakland or somewhere in California, no, matter of fact, I believe it was Texas, who left her door open on a hot night in Texas to play video games with her 8-year-old niece or nephew. And officers who were called to investigate, do a wellness check, instead of going to the door, decided to shoot through the window and kill this young lady in our own home. No arrest made. Then you had Aubrey. You had Ahmaud Aubrey. Ahmaud Aubrey, taking a run through his neighborhood while we dealt with COVID, was killed by people, 2 white men who hunted him like he was a deer. And they didn't want to make any charges on that. So it's not even so much that people have a distraction of their jobs, of their lives, of being able to get out and socialize with other people. They were held captive to sit there and watch this. Not just people in the communities of color, but people also outside of the community of color who were naturally outraged. And they sat here and watched each municipality make excuses and apologize for what was the mishandling of these cases. And that all led to the culmination. And there was many others who I'm not going to get into right now. You have Manuel Ellis. You had so many other cases that happened during this time. And we're just sitting here watching this. We're frustrated. We're aggravated. We're feeling misrepresented. We're feeling marginalized by our president. And we're watching this happen piece by piece by piece and getting more and more frustrated, which led us up to one culminating event. And that's number 4. And then 2 weeks ago, we watched George Floyd murdered. We watched him die in real time. Not blocked out, not described. We watched this man's bladder release. We watched his nose bleed. We watched him beg for his life and call for his mother, his dead mother, while he was handcuffed and prone. And while he was handcuffed and prone, a man sat on his neck with his knees in his neck, while 2 other officers held him down even further, and one officer told people to get back. See, the thing of it is, and for those of you who don't understand the outrage and why this hit so hard, is because it's bad enough that the man died, but if you look at the body language of the officer who sat on his neck with his knees, he had his hands in his pocket like he was waiting for an egg to cook. This man is begging for his life. He's not a threat. He's not a combatant. And you just sat here and killed him. Now, the funny thing was, immediately after it, if people look at the reports, they tried to make it seem like George Floyd was resisting arrest and that he had drugs and things in his system and he was a criminal. But as the beautiful developments of the information age came out, everybody's coming with video, we started seeing video at different angles, and we started seeing there's no way that you could ever pinpoint that. And it came out later on, the man never even wrote a fraudulent check or handed off a fraudulent $20 bill. And when that happened, the nation, of course, as you see, went nuts. See, because for some of you people out there who don't understand, maybe you're not that old, maybe you're newer generation, for other communities and for young people of color who aren't that old, this has happened multiple times where we've been told by municipalities, we've been told by politicians that they have to take the word of an officer, even though a whole community sat here and watched a man be killed. He was shot unarmed, he was choked out. And they had to take the word of the officers allegedly because of emotional reasons and the unreliability of witnesses. But it all led us to believe, they led us on to believe that if there was some indecisive proof that said that this is what happened, we would move on it. And they dropped the ball again. To the point where this has been going on so long, to my point, that it's been captured even in movies. If people go back to 1989, Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee, Radio Raheem died almost identically to George Floyd. This has been happening in our community for decades. And no one's been getting arrested for it. So when you add a marginalized community, when you add a marginalized community by the presidency, you add a COVID scare that has everybody restless, frustrated, and held hostage to just be barraged by this information on a daily and a minute by minute, hour by hour basis. You have a back-to-back barrage of new people being slaughtered needlessly and people being apologists for it, and then finally this situation comes about. What did you think was going to happen? See, for those of you who don't understand, I want to speak clearly and concisely to you. We understood and we've seen this all before. And more we're starting to see in this information age more video. So there's no debate about it. There's no saying this person was a drug addict, their testimony doesn't mean anything, or this person had a record, their testimony doesn't mean anything. Cameras and video testimony doesn't lie. It's not open for interpretation. We watched that man suffer for 9 minutes and die needlessly. This is what that's all about. So maybe for those of you who are a little aloof as to why this has erupted the way it has on a global level, on a state level, even in the city level, there's not many cities in this country that have not been affected by protesting, by looting, by rioting. Maybe now you can kind of understand. Do your research. I put out a video before George Floyd, and I'll leave the link again below. That says, and the title of it was, why does it seem like law enforcement hates communities of color? Before this happened, I'm hoping that at the very least a dialogue can be continued where people can honestly see what the rage and the anger is all about. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't the knee of that officer that killed George Floyd. It was the intolerance and the atmosphere of intolerance of this country pressing against George Floyd that ultimately took that man's life.